Welcome to Lynn Cullen Live. Talk radio without the static. Email your questions and comments to lynncullenshow@gmail.com. And now your host, Lynn Cullen.
Yep, befuddled Lynn Cullen. How you doing? Happy Monday. I gotta tell you, I ain't doing so well. I didn't sleep last night. One of those nights where you can't stop thinking and everything you're thinking about is dire, is upsetting, is definitely not prone to sleep. So I gave up. I read a book. I played games on my computer. I wandered around the house, and I speak to you now in a bit of a dazed, definitely sleep deprived state. Man, guys. So I saw a quote right before the show started. The barbarians are inside the gates. And that sort of sums up, I guess, why I couldn't sleep last night. That and thoughts of mortality, since my weekend was filled with bad news of death. It's just, life is tough, and I've got it about as easy as anyone who lives. So I can't imagine if I'm feeling fearful, what is an undocumented person in this country feeling? I mean, absolute terror. I'm sorry to bedevil you with this on this sunny Monday, the last Monday in June of 2025. But I must admit, I am in a despairing state. I mean, all you have to do is look at how I was thinking, I just can't anymore even read. I can't read this stuff anymore. We're living in a fucking nightmare. Um, New York Times, Saturday. The entire front page is filled with, I mean, the justices put limit on judges' power in Birthright citizenship case. You know, things you couldn't even imagine. I remember when Trump, said he was going to do away with birthright citizenship, and I thought, well, lots of luck with that, buddy. It's part of the Constitution of the United States. I don't think you can do that with an executive order. And I remember the shock I felt when the assumption was, when prosecutors were still going after Trump with all of those cases, with all of the criminality, and he had gotten before the Supreme Court this absurd contention that his attorneys were making, that he was somehow immune, that he was, in fact, above the law, that he, as Richard Nixon had so famously said in an interview with, what's his name, the Brit, that if the president does it, it's it's not illegal or whatever exactly he said. That's the gist. And we were stunned, David Frost. We were stunned. We were appalled that Nixon thought he was above the law. And clearly, it was proven he was not. But then Donald Trump says it, essentially, takes it to the Supreme Court. And I don't know that I'll ever get over the shock of the court actually pretty much agreeing, giving him immunity, destroying all those cases against him, giving him free rein, so that he felt, I can do anything, and then proceeded to do it. And then as these cases get to the court, you think with birthright citizenship, well, they're going to tell him what? And no, they didn't. They finagled. They're a slippery bunch, these six. Too clever by half. They didn't really, as they so often do, they didn't really rule on whether or not he could do that to the 14th Amendment. They instead, of course, rule that a federal judge can't step in and stop such a blatantly unconstitutional act. So, the justices, this court is creating two Americas. They're creating blue state America and red state America. And think of all the people now in red states, because apparently because of this, what the justices did, people in red states who may themselves not be citizens but have given birth here and have children, some of them grown, that are citizens of this country. At least they were citizens of this country, but in the states that weren't part of this challenge to Trump's action. The Supreme Court has essentially said that Trump's action stands. People, probably millions of people in this country who are citizens, who vote, are now wondering if they are. The fear that these barbarians inside the gates traffic in is just astonishing. I was reading that the people who pick our crops, who are mostly undocumented, one of the largest agricultural counties in Texas, 80% of the workers who take in those crops that put food on our tables are undocumented. And they are living now in fear even of leaving their homes, fear of opening the door if their doorbell rings. They have American children, or since they're living in Texas, maybe they don't. I was reading about a woman who cleans. She doesn't work in the field. She's been here for 25 years. Her daughter is becoming a nurse. She's a nursing student. But because her mother is now afraid to go to work, her daughter has had to leave. Her daughter, an American, at least she thought she was, an American citizen who wanted to become someone who nursed you, me, anybody, has dropped out of nursing school to take a job so that she can support her mother, who's no longer bringing money in because she's afraid to leave the house. Multiply that one household by millions. These are not invaders of our country. These are not rapists. These are not murderers. These are not carriers of disease, vermin, all of the dehumanizing descriptions that have been used by Trump for years. These are hardworking, good people contributing to our country and literally putting food on our tables. And the article went on to interview a farmer who employs all of these farm workers, and they're all hiding. They're not coming to work. He's got watermelons rotting in his field. He can't get them in because they're too fearful of showing themselves. So he's going to lose his crop. I imagine the prices of watermelons is going to be going up. Now, all these ICE raids started after much of America's crops had been brought in. But farmers are now wondering whether to bother planting for next season. Because why plant if there'll be no one to reap? And I don't know, guys. That's one little story, one little thing that can trouble your head and keep you in a sleepless, unsettled state. And then there was this other, on the same front page, Saturday. Trump pushes college leader out at Virginia. This is, again, unprecedented. No president has the right to push the leader of a major university out of his job. But Trump's used to using force. He loves it. Force by way of threats. It just worked, I was sad to see, with Canada. They had a tax. Trump had a fit. He imposed greater tariffs, and damn Canada got rid of the tax. So Trump is being rewarded for this behavior. It works all too often. He threatens the Board of Regents at the University of Virginia, and they put pressure on their fine president and steps down. He sicked his own Justice Department, a Justice Department which has nothing to do with justice anymore, and is now an enforcement arm for the president's threats and vengeance. Trump said, if you want the Justice Department to back off, you got to get rid of him. And they did. And shame on them. Shame on the majority on the court, who also decided that any parent, because of their beliefs, can demand that their children not be taught certain things. Imagine trying to run a school, a public school now, that the court has said that any parent can come in and say, my child will not read that book. You cannot tell my child this or that. So you will have millions of micro managers and now Supreme Court mandated censors disrupting curricula, making sure their children are not educated. I mean, one of the great things that made this country is our public education system. It brought us together. Before I went to public school, my friends were all the children of my parents' friends. They were largely Jewish, and believe me, Green Bay was hardly largely Jewish, but I had a very small group and the few kids in the neighborhood, maybe. But then I went to public school, where 98% of the kids were not Jews, where they often came from families that were not as wealthy as mine, that lived in smaller homes and their mothers worked. Different realities, different lives. And that did nothing but enrich me. Wow. So parents who have said, you cannot teach my child this kind of mathematics, you cannot read this book because it has a woman showing a woman who works outside the home. You cannot, how the hell are we supposed to have an education system? So um, I'm not telling you anything you don't know, but it's tough. And here I want to say, and the 4th of July is this week. What is it we're going to celebrate? I want to know. I'm serious. Are we going to pretend this is some normal 4th of July 4th, 2025? We're going to, what, set off firecrackers and act like things are normal? Our democracy is barely, barely alive. It's in the ICU. We are not a free people. How could you say we're a free people when so many of us are living in fear? Institutions that used to hold are crumbling. We do not have a functional Congress. We have a totally politicized Supreme Court, and we've got a madman in the White House. And we're going to celebrate the 4th of July. Susan sent me this, and I told her I'm with you. She says, instead of wasteful and polluting fireworks, how about working on feeding, housing, teaching the next generation, getting together with friends and family, eating good food, all better ways to celebrate than, yeah, making a big racket, scaring wildlife and terrorizing animals. She says, I'm turning 74 in about a week and feel we're heading in the wrong direction in every way, and this is not why my grandparents left their homeland for a better life. Yeah, yeah. Um, yeah. I just I'm beginning to have no words, so God help me. Um, oh, and our great government. You read things and you can't even believe what you're reading. And I'm not saying that in the usual sense of is it gaslighting because we're regularly lied to by the government now, or is it AI? Is it somebody playing with me? Is this disinformation? Um, and again, you can't have a democracy when there are no agreed upon facts and realities. But I do know this is true. Headline: US satellites will soon stop providing data on hurricanes. Um, I needn't tell you that our ability, because of satellites, to track hurricanes from their formation to where they're heading to their development has helped prepare for when they strike land. And when they strike land, they create destruction and death. And we know that. But since we've been able to track them from the skies, from satellites, those deaths have been brought. I mean, I can't imagine how many lives have been saved. And yet people still do die. And here we are at the beginning of hurricane season in a time when the weather is clearly changing and not for the better. Storms, any of us can now attest, becoming more frightening. Hurricanes becoming stronger. And the National Atmospheric and Oceanic Administration has said that it will stop in the next few days providing data from satellites that have been helping hurricane forecasters do their jobs. You can't make it up. As a matter of fact, today is the day. We'll be halted Monday, June 30, the agency said, without giving further explanation. Forecasters are apoplectic. NOAA, the agency, did not respond to a request for comment by the reporter from the New York Times who was reporting this. They just say what they say. They say the data, the information will not be made available, is not going to be there. And here's what I'm always asking with these barbarians in charge. What possible reason could there be to hamstring hurricane forecasters by denying them information that they rely upon as the hurricane season begins? There's quotes here from forecasters. My God, this is an incredibly big hit. And for the tens of millions of Americans who live in hurricane-prone areas. Now, there are some other satellites up there where they can get some information, but they do not. It'll be piecemeal. It will not give they're losing really important information. And that no reason is given. The satellites allowed them to be able to see what was happening even at night. And one of the forecasters says the nightmare is going to bed with a tropical storm and you're waking up to a hurricane. And these canceled satellite streams are going to mean we're going to get more and more of what he calls a sunrise surprise. The guy who previously headed the hurricane team at the National Hurricane Center said, we're going to lose about half of the images we've relied on. And forecasters are going to see hours-long delays in the National Hurricane Center being able to recognize that a storm has begun to strengthen. And this is a particular concern because hurricanes have been intensifying much more rapidly and more frequently. This is critical information. Okay. Well, again, you can ask what possibly could be the reason, and you'll be greeted by no comment from the agency. So, back to this birthright citizenship thing, which has just blown my mind. Blown my mind. I mean, it's in the 14th Amendment. It's after, the Civil War, the government of the United States, ain't easy to pass a constitutional amendment. State legislatures have to, overwhelmingly sign on. And after the Civil War, yeah, all of them did and said, and they did this because they said, hey, if you're born here, you're a citizen, which means all those former slaves, those slaves are citizens of the United States of Amerika. And so I guess some on the court were saying, in their tortured reasoning, that, well, the 14th Amendment was meant to apply to slaves. It was dealing with slaves. And then we created this thing that goes way beyond that. These are the conservatives that I believe are supposed to believe in settled law, right? Ain't nothing more settled than birthright citizenship. It's about as settled as it can be. Been around for 150 years. I'd say it's settled. But they'll do anything to get where they want to get. And I read somebody who said on social media, and I appreciated it, well, okay, but following their kind of reasoning, if birthright citizenship only applies to children of slaves, then I don't know, but then the Second Amendment only applies to muskets. You have the right to bear a musket. And so, if people born of non citizens are not going to be citizens, I got news for you. Our Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, was born in this country of immigrants who were not citizens at the time of his birth. And so Marco Rubio, I guess, somebody better call ICE. He's in that red state of Florida. They weren't part of this challenge. Marco Rubio, maybe deport him back to Cuba or send him off to Libya. What difference does it make? They also said, didn't this court say, you don't have to send somebody back to their own country. You can send them to hell without due process. If people born of non-citizens, but in this country, are now susceptible to deportation themselves, I've got some, I think, okay, somebody call ICE and tell them that Donald Trump Jr. and Ivanka Trump Kushner and Eric Trump were all born of a mother who was an immigrant and not a citizen. Deport them. But we know all of this is not about those people. No. Although Marco comes close. He does come close. So, guys, I saw something today and I thought, what? I I I somehow had missed it, but this is from Josh Marshall, Talking Points memo. You may be aware of him. Does good reporting. And he said that when Trump was at the NATO summit, that he gave a news conference and in the Netherlands. By the way, did you see the Queen, the Queen of the Netherlands? Beautiful woman. Did you see her standing next to Trump? And quite clearly making fun of him, mimicking the way he speaks. Did you see that? Oh man, she's my hero. But Trump flat out said that he gave Iran permission to bomb our military base in Qatar. What? A US president told a nation that has vowed to destroy us, go ahead, yeah, you can bomb it. And he flat out said it. He's quoted as saying, they said, the Iranians, we're going to shoot them. Is 1:00 okay? I said, Trump said, it's fine. And then Trump says, and everybody was emptied off the base so they couldn't get hurt. Now, okay, in some respects, I get it. It's so odd. This is the way statecraft works now. We bomb Iran, and then they get on the phone and say, hey, look, all right, we need to act like we're retaliating, but could we just bomb your base in Qatar around 1:00, and yeah, so we can say we won. And yeah, I get all that. But guys, Josh Marshall says, it's so odd that this has received so little attention. Because can you imagine if Joe Biden was found and said, "Yeah, I told them they could bomb us, one of our bases. You know, you have to let them save face." But Marshall says, "My God, this represents the most shocking dereliction of duty one could imagine for a commander in chief." And Republicans didn't say a word. Can you imagine? They'd be calling for the head of any Democrat who did that. I so despise these guys. And their big, beautiful bill, they're gonna vote on that today. Again, God help so many people in this country. Taking food from children, help and money from the poor, health care from millions so they can give Jeff Bezos more money. How does American voters, support these people? How did they vote for these people? The largest healthcare system in Louisiana. Now you'll know that the guy who got the bill through the House of Representatives is from Louisiana, House Speaker Mike Johnson. And, every Republican from Louisiana voted for this. And the largest health system in Louisiana warned them that if this bill goes through, the cuts to Medicaid in it, quote, would be historic in their devastation. They said the economic consequences pale in comparison to the harm that will be caused to residents across Louisiana, regardless of insurance status, who will no longer be able to get the care they need. They're talking about the fact that hospitals will be closing down, especially in rural areas, and people will literally not have access to care, even if they have still some insurance. And that's just a little teeny bit that's in there that is going to cause so much pain. Now, it ain't a done deal yet, although I'd be stunned if it doesn't pass, because Trump gets what he wants because the Republican Party has ceased to exist as a party. It is I don't call it a cult because I know a lot of them are not true believers. It's a grouping of cowards and unprincipled people. But there are 8 potential, I mean, if you're being very hopeful, senators who possibly might, God knows how, summon the courage to say no to Trump and vote against this bill. And if you know anyone who lives in their states, because they really listen more to their constituents than to the likes of us, then please tell these people please get in touch with them today and say you've got to, in no uncertain terms, tell your senator that if they vote for this, they're finished. Make them be more afraid of their own voters than of Trump. If you know anyone in North Carolina, in Alaska, in Maine, in Kentucky, in Wisconsin, I do, in Missouri, in Utah, in Iowa, because we know Tom Tillis, that's North Carolina, is probably not going to vote for it. And he's already said, I will not run for re-election, because Trump has already said, we're getting rid of you, going to primary you, because that's what happens. So we'll see how many others are willing to do that. Tom Tillis in North Carolina, although his vote has not been cast yet. Lisa Murkowski in Alaska, who's been trying to get a deal, a carve out for her state. Susan Collins, yeah, right, of Maine. Rand Paul of Kentucky, there's a possibility too. Rand Paul and Tillis, and I'm hoping Murkowski, but then you need one more. And I don't know. This list says Ron Johnson in Wisconsin. You gotta be kidding me. But he might vote no, not because people will suffer, but because it will increase the debt so much. So some of them you can maybe appeal to in that way. I don't know. Joni Ernst? I think not. Iowa. There is the smallest of hope. I want to get some obits in. Dave Parker. It's just so sad that this great player was denied the Hall of Fame for so many years. He should have been a first ballot entry, but had that little cocaine thing that happened. And that he died before he could get to Cooperstown to receive his due, which I guess happens this July 27. So that's very sad. Dave Parker. I remember covering that trial. And boy, that was something. Not the one where the pirate parrot was implicated too. I loved it. The parrot was involved. Well, I mean, so Dave Parker, was a huge part of that extraordinary 70s team that, won the 79 World Series, and Parker was doing coke then. Jesus. I saw someone write in the obits, I remember the 79 World Series, Parker throwing an Oriole out at home from deep right field. Well, that's considered one of the greatest. I mean, wow. Yeah. deep right field. He throws a guy out at home. Not didn't go to a cutoff man. It didn't. It was a nonstop ball. And the Pirates were down 3-1 in games, and they end up winning that series. The New York Times had some unhappy information in it that I hadn't seen before. It said here that after the Pirates signed him to this huge 5-year contract, baseball's most lucrative deal at the time, it says Pittsburgh fans were not happy. Says, this is the New York Times obit. Pittsburgh was a blue-collar city whose workers were concerned about their own future. Well, understandably, since the mills were closing down. So Pirates fans were regarded as hardly thrilled at the size of Parker's contract. I mean, I don't know. What does that have to do with them? He's in a different business. He's getting what? I've never understood that. Parker reported receiving hate mail and said that the tires of his 2 Mercedes were slashed. Well, I would say that's old Pittsburgh racism rearing its ugly head. During the first game of a July 1980 doubleheader at Three Rivers, when Willie Stargell Day was being celebrated, a fan threw a 9-volt battery at Parker during the 8th inning of the opener, narrowly missing his head while he stood in right field. He took himself out of the game and soon afterward asked the Pirates to trade him. He said, "I've reached the point of no return." So it was the fans. The fans, the racist fans, got rid of him. Wow. Wow. Shame, shame, shame. And staying here in Pittsburgh, a man I knew, good man, funny man you knew from TV, Jack Etzel. He was a funny guy. We plied the same territory in news. We were both essentially feature reporters, often asked to leave the audience, laughing a little bit at the end of a show. Jack was just a delightful human. He was 91 years old. His obit begins thusly: Herbert John Etzel, Jack, peacefully signed off on June 24, 2025, at the age of 91, with the sole regret that he did not draft this obituary himself. Or maybe he did, but his family just hasn't found it in the myriad pages of his writing, music, and other memories. And it talks about, man, he hopscotched around before he got here. I didn't know that. He enlisted in the U.S. Navy Band in 1952 as a trombonist. I didn't realize he was that much older than me. And he played in jazz clubs. He drove school buses while he went to college at the University of Denver, and then he got jobs, radio, television. He was a news director in Indiana, Illinois bureau chief at KMOX in St. Louis, and then came to Pittsburgh to WPXI in 1974. And a delightful character. Born in Thunderbolt. What? Thunderbolt. What a great place name. Georgia. Jack Edsel. Good man. And then also we've lost Bill Moyers, um, who had an extraordinary career, starting out incredibly young at a very high level in the White House with LBJ. Um, I mean, he was Johnson, when he became president, brought two of these young guys from Texas with him. I became very close to one of those guys, which is why I feel like I know a little more about Moyers. There were two young men, Bill Moyers and Nicholas Johnson, who, uh, I mean, they were in their early 20s, but LBJ knew them as bright as blazes, and he brought them with him. Nick Johnson, who became my friend for some time, became the head of the Federal Communications Commission, amongst other things prior to it, something with the Navy, I forget. And Nixon had him on his enemies list and knocked him off the FCC. And Nick went on to back home to Iowa. No, it wasn't home. Texas was home. Back to, for some reason, Iowa. And as far as I know, he's still alive. We've lost touch. But Moyers, he said, what was closer to LBJ. And I mean, he was like 22 years old and right there next to him. And then he had a falling out with him. Not sure. Everybody says he was one of the more complicated and secretive men. That he was so good at pulling information out of others, but you couldn't get much out of him. He supervised the drafting of the legislation that created the Peace Corps and worked as second to Sergeant Shriver on it. He ran LBJ's presidential campaign, and he oversaw the creation of that infamous Daisy Girl commercial against Barry Goldwater, in which a little girl is plucking daisies from petals off a daisy as the sound of her counting dissolves into the sound of a countdown of a nuclear bomb, and then an explosion, nuclear explosion fills the screen. That commercial got yanked, but did a lot of damage to the Goldwater campaign. Moyers acted as his secretary and then went on to an extraordinary career in journalism. So, Bill Moyers, he was a minister too. I'm just an indefatigable guy, a great deal of passion. Okay, I guess we're out of time. Before I go, just want to get this in. I had seen this, Milton. Milton says, Lisa Murkowski got the carve-out she wanted, and then she was part of the vote to push the bill forward to its vote. But part of her carve-out was part of why the Senate parliamentarian said, you can't do that. I mean, there's so much in the bill that is just, no, you can't do that in a budget bill. Well, maybe if she doesn't have her carve out in there, she's a potential no vote, but I wouldn't count on it. She has said more than once that she's afraid. She has said she's afraid of Trump. Incredible. Incredible. If this country were going to end up as a dictatorship, God, we couldn't even have the ability to find a more impressive dictator, not a joke, not a cartoon figure, not a friggin' reality star who's just playing this whole thing as a reality TV show and a crazed lunatic power trip. Oh my God, America. My God. All right, sorry. I despair. I despair.
Lynn Cullen Live, Monday through Thursday from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. and archived at pghcitypaper.com. The opinions expressed on Lynn Cullen Live are those of the host and do not necessarily reflect the viewpoints of Pittsburgh City Paper or its advertisers.